Meta. It's a very interesting term because depending on who you ask and what community or game they play, they can have an entirely separate response from that of another person. I think for the most part, most individuals would agree that defining the meta in a video game can be very dependent on when you're doing it. Metas shift extremely often. But today I want to take the time to continue on from my point about how communities impact a game to discuss how the meta in a game can impact both the community and their respective response of it. An example is, and the primary one we'll be using for this is Genshin Impact. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that early on in Genshin's life cycle, there was an entirely different meta point of view, or at least point of view in regards to every character in the game, than there is now. Many older Genshin players, and by older, I mean individuals who were playing when the game first came out, will remember when Bennett was considered awful, and Diluc, Razor, and Venti were considered the best characters in the game. Now, this isn't to say that if you use those characters, you're wrong or you're bad, but this is to say that it's dramatically shifted. Bennett is considered the best character in the game, with Venti being, I think, A or S tier and not double S tier, whereas Diluc, meanwhile, has moved below Bennett, below Venti, and Razor, I think, is considered C tier. Now, this is not emblematic of a problem. As the game expands, it's likely that characters are going to be moved around and shifted around, but instead, what this means is that if you're a newer player or an older player, the dynamic that's occurred in the game that you previously used to has shifted and can shift dramatically over the course of months or even a year. You'll see a lot of individuals, I believe Afro Senju, for example, spent multiple thousands of dollars to get Diluc. Tenha did the exact same thing, and now if you're looking back on that decision in the current perspective, you can spend 400 and get a amazing character like Ganyu, like Kazuha, like Ayaka, who are vastly superior to the individual that they rolled for when he first released. Now, once again, if you're a whale, it doesn't necessarily matter as much in my opinion, because whether you're free to play or not, the concept of getting a unit and having them fall off is entirely different from a unit being pushed and advertised to you so heavily because of how good they are. And in my opinion, Genshin is the worst offender of this, and the Genshin community specifically. Mind you, if you play Genshin, I personally play it, some of my moderators play it. Genshin players aren't bad necessarily. What I mean is that the community has a very wide and very unusual point of view regarding certain units. By this I mean, a unit like, for example, we'll consider Yoimiya. She's up next in the rerun banners. She came out and it was met with a varying amount of response. People were either disappointed or they were okay with her. She wasn't game changing, and in the current game in which characters are so expensive, they kind of need to be game changing or feel very fluid. Because Yoimiya didn't have the fluidity or versatility of other units, she came out with some auto aim issues, and considering the fact that she wasn't on par with Ganyu, Ayaka, or Hu Tao, she was considered a much less valuable pull in comparison to other units, partially contributing to why she did so poorly, at least in terms of sales. Keep in mind, if you're Yoimiya main, you already know that the people who main Yoimiya do absolutely adore that character, and I intend on pulling for her as well. But meta shifting and meta units can also be a detriment to the community, because if you're looking at things, once again, from the Genshin Impact perspective, and if you're looking at the Genshin Impact community, the focus around a unit being meta and the focus around every other unit comparatively being looked at in comparison to the potential rerun or the potential usage and viability of another meta unit, it's very, very bad. An example is if we're taking a look at some recent characters, Ayato, Arataki Itto, Yelan. Now, their banners weren't directly after one another. However, what I want to instead focus on is how they were viewed and discussed in the community. If you're looking at the most recent one, such as Yelan, who had her first banner alongside Xiao and the quest line that featured both of them, she's a very good unit. I have her and I enjoy her quite a lot. She's very fun. However, by comparison, you also have the fact that Yelan was compared to a Xingqiu, a already amazing unit, and with the speculation of a Kazuha rerun, she was less recommended by the community specifically because of that. Meanwhile, if you're looking at Arataki Itto, because of him being Geo, it was more so focused on, I believe Mtash previously made a statement in which he talked about Arataki Itto, but also mentioned that Kazuha's rerun may be soon. Ayato was once again compared to the likes of Xingqiu, Kokomi, Mona, who's a standard banner unit, and because of that, he was focused on less so because of his gameplay and the fluidity of his movements, but more so instead of the potential of another meta unit being reran close to him, such as Ayaka, and how well he would perform overall. Harkening back to Yoimiya, her banner was a mess once again because of the mixed perception of the community. She was also pushed essentially between two highly desired units. You had Raiden Shogun, you had Ayaka. She had internal cooldown issues, which affect every unit, but a lot of the issues with Yoimiya and the issues with other characters that have been perceived really well, such as Yaimiko, are issues that, in the vast majority of the community's opinion, should have either been resolved shortly after or on release, or alternatively, should have been mentioned beforehand. Once again, even with her rerun, Klee and Kazuha, one of the most desired units in the game, are pushed right before her. So a lot of individuals who were previously saving for her are probably going to go for Kazuha unless they already have him. And with the release of Sumeru outright, people are going to skip her more than likely for the Dendro characters. So this doesn't necessarily come down to just one character being a bad sale or one character having issues upon release. We've had multiple units like that. Some of them got buffed, like Zhongli, but others didn't. Others received indirect buffs, such as Kokomi, but it didn't necessarily change the problem with the unit themselves or the game. But if you're a long-time Genshin player, if you're a long-time individual who maybe has previously rolled for characters that you liked, or maybe rolled for the most meta unit, you do know how annoying and overbearing a lot of the individuals who discuss meta can be sometimes. If every unit is compared to the best and most optimal pick for an account, it doesn't necessarily allow you to gauge properly how good or how bad a unit is. To this metric, you could like Yoimiya because of her design, but want to know more in depth about her damage, her team compositions, how expensive she is to gear up, and if the individual you're watching or listening to is always saying they're worse or Yoimiya is a worse unit because of Kazuha's existence, then it does dampen the opinion overall, because if every character is compared to Kazuha, compared to Ganyu, or to Aika, or to Hu Tao, no character is necessarily given a fair chance. Every Anemo unit would be compared to Kazuha for versatility, for his team buffing capabilities. Damage-wise, the ceilings will always be Ganyu and Aika for the consistency in Ganyu's case, or for the burst amount in Aika's case. Utility will always be characters such as Bennett, Zhongli, or Raiden. Any healer will always be compared to the likes of Bennett for his versatility as an attack buffer and a healer, or Jean for viridescent shred and burst heals. If any healer comes out to be a 5-star, they will be compared directly to Kokomi. Hydro units will always be compared to the other existing ones, Ayato, Kokomi, Xingqiu, Yelan, and Mona, alongside Barbara. This also means that the development or new characters are more restrictive in terms of what they actually can be. Kuki Shinobu came out and he wasn't anything special. However, a lot of her potential may be locked behind Dendro's reactions in the future. It doesn't necessarily mean that she didn't suffer as a result. Because communities oftentimes, if they center around the meta, and if a vast majority of the content creators center around the meta, they won't focus on the potential of a unit, they'll focus on what they do now in comparison to the next best option. Meta, I believe, can and potentially is a good thing for a lot of games if it's handled correctly, and a lot of that handling doesn't necessarily come down to how a company does it, but how the community perceives it. In Blue Archive, you do have really meta picks, and it has changed overall. When you were first starting out the game and you were re-rolling, Hibiki, Iori, and Haruna were the most meta-defining options. Hibiki as a support that you didn't necessarily need on the field, Iori for a high damage piercing, and Haruna as one of the few mystic units that were exceptionally good, and she's still really good today. Outside of this, you have Azusa, who was released much later on. Both her variations, swimsuit version and her regular version, are extremely good. You have Akko, who was recently released as a support and is amazing. Tsubaki is a tank, and she's still exceptional even from day one. And sure, the meta was defined in a lot of cases by what was happening on the JP server because they had access to Nora units, so you could kind of map things out beforehand. But in Blue Archive, you do have units who are really good, but the community doesn't hyper-focus on them. The community does not compare every single unit, at least from my perspective, to the most meta-defining option, to the best available. And therefore, new units, or units that are getting their first banners, are still given a chance to be discussed openly before, in any way, shape, or form, considering, okay, well, when is the next Azusa coming? When is the next Akko coming? Every unit is given a chance to shine on their own without being hampered down by the existence of another, unless that unit is bad, in which case they're openly discussed still for their viability, especially if you like them, but nobody will in any way, shape, or form disregard the fact they may be a poor choice. In Arknights, and please take this with a grain of salt, I'm not the most in-depth Arknights player and I'm not knowledgeable on every single character, but you do have certain ones who stand out, Surtur, and then you have Silver Ash. Once you get into higher levels and E2 of them, you do have access to more skills, which does give you some better availability. I believe Silver Ash's skill 2 or skill 3 is extremely good. You have Silence as a healer, and she's exceptional. You have Myrtle as a vanguard, who will pretty much carry you throughout the early stages, at least in my opinion, by giving you so many deployment points you can put the rest of your team out pretty quickly. Now, none of this invalidates any other units, but at least in my opinion, the Arknights community, Blue Archive community, and perhaps the Honkai community, I won't speak on them because I don't play the game, are much more chill in terms of whether or not you should pull for units, because they do give a lot more in-depth answers and aren't always deferring to the next potential banner or the next potential character. And I know I'm mostly a Blue Archive channel, but I do play Genshin a lot, and it does annoy me to an extent when every new unit is never given a chance, because they're always compared to the highest damaging option, the highest supporting option, such as Kazuha. And I understand in a lot of individuals' perspective that may be a fair point because the units are expensive, but it doesn't necessarily invalidate the character. A lot of individuals who I've spoken to here and there have previously been interested in Kazuha, but as the community began to conform around the idea that he's this pedestal-like god-tier character that everyone needs to have, it's become so much more annoying to discuss him, which in turn made them dislike a unit they previously loved, because every new character is always spoken about, well, comparing to Kazuha, well, in terms of Kazuha's rerun, well, we don't know when Kazuha's coming back, and as a direct result, it's worsened their opinion of him. Now, I know you could have a different opinion from me, and if you do, by all means, tell me in the comment section down below. I do want to hear your thoughts. Join the Discord server. The opinions regarding Yoimiya were generated from one of my moderators, and I would like to see more individuals there. That way I can discuss more characters, both from Genshin, Blue Archive, and Arknights in the future. Subscribe if that interests you, check out the second channel, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.